So, I think many of you know that here in California, in Oregon, Washington, and other places in the West here, West Coast, and going up into Canada, and up in the Arctic regions, the tundra, there are fires everywhere. There was a nun at the time of the Buddha named Upachala, and Upachala wrote two verses. I'm going to read the first one now and then the second one later. She wrote, "All the world is on fire. All the world is burning. All the world is ablaze. All the world is quaking." So that was 2,500 years ago. And here in California we have COVID-19, we have economic disruption for many people, we have fires, and if those are not directly impacted by fires, we have a tremendous amount of smoke that keeps many people indoors. And it's really sad to see the people who can't stay indoors. There are people who do outdoor work, farm workers and construction workers who are just continuing to work when these kinds of terrible conditions, unhealthy conditions. And but this world on fire has been going on for a long time, in the time of the Buddha. And Upachala writes, "All the world is quaking." Some people are beginning to wonder if the next big earthquake in California will come now as well, just to kind of, just add to the complication of it all. And to think that way maybe it also comes from fear and from weariness, from just, some people are exhausted by all these months of COVID-19 and now all these weeks of fires, and it just seems to go on and on. Feels like a long winter. And meditation can renew us. Meditation is kind of, at the best, is allow us to start fresh every time we come out of meditation. That all the traces, all the dust and soot that's built up in our hearts and the minds, as we go through the day and are worried or stressed or tense or preoccupied, somehow has a chance to clear out to some degree. And it's a wonderful thing to be able to start fresh. Start, in a sense, in a certain kind of way, start over. Maybe not starting over with new responsibilities they carry with us, but the ability to really step out of meditation with fresh eyes, and it's like you've gotten a good night's sleep and you're fresh and new, and so that the continuity of the wariness that weighs us down maybe doesn't build up so much, because we have this way of refreshing ourselves. And just like some people do, if they exercise or other things people do that really allows them to refresh, to kind of really shed everything, so it doesn't build and build. In that last meditation and focusing on relaxation, some people might feel that or believe that that's a pretty elementary practice in meditation, just to relax. That meditation certainly should be much more profound or have more higher, loftier aspirations or purposes or insights or experiences than just relaxing. And maybe that's true, but as with a lot of things in Buddhism, it's very important not to overlook the foundation. And we want to have a foundation in place from which we can go to maybe develop further. And so relaxation is one of them. The Buddha taught relaxation. In the English translations of his teachings, they use maybe a more sophisticated term for it. The English translations talk about tranquility and tranquilizing the body and mind. And but this comes to the same thing as relaxation, calming. But then, here we are in this heartbreaking time of so much distress, and now with the fires, and it's clear that there's climate change is escalating much faster than the climate scientists had expected, and that's kind of the big surprise. This was predicted in the predictive models that climate scientists had, and some of them are saying it just came sooner than they expected. So how do we manage with all this? How do we manage with this beyond just becoming relaxed? How do we understand it to make sense of it? And some people are looking for understanding. Some people are praying that someone or something will make a difference and help. Some people are just kind of swept up in their fear and their anger and despair. And some people don't quite know what to do, and they read the news and just get more and more upset just reading the news. If we go back to the teachings of the Buddha for some guidance on this, I think it's very important to understand that the Buddha promotes action. He even though many of us in the West associate Buddhism with meditation, when you read the texts of the teachings of the Buddha, you get a strong sense that what he's promoting is action, to be engaged. And the word for action is karma, which has different meanings, but over and over again in the text it simply means action, and he's promoting action. And he, in fact, he calls himself a Kammavadin, Kammavadin, which means a teacher of action. And and he said some interesting things about action. As many of you know, because I quote it so often, the Buddha defines a wise person as someone who benefits oneself, benefits others, benefits self and others, and benefits the whole world. He also said that wisdom shines through action, or maybe a little bit more precise, wisdom shines through enactment. Bhikkhu Bodhi translates it as wisdom shines through its manifestation, its enactment. So, Buddhism is often associated with wisdom, but we don't want. Wisdom is meant for us to act differently, to act in a new way, in a beneficial way, and the Dharma is not for people who are inactive. However, sometimes in certain Buddhist circles, and some meditators get the idea that the goal of Buddhism is to be inactive, and not to do, and not to be engaged, and somehow just be. Back in the 1960s, there was a cartoon character called Mr. Natural. You can probably look him up someplace. There was a wonderful cartoon of Mr. Natural just sitting meditating in the desert for decades, centuries, I guess, just sitting there, while whole cities were built around him and then decayed, and he's just sitting there meditating, doing nothing except meditating. And so this poem by Upachala is one of the kind of teachings that maybe could get the idea that maybe inaction is somehow the goal. And here's the second half, or first half that I read already. All the world is on fire. All the world is burning. All the world is ablaze. All the world is quaking. That which does not quake or blaze, that to which worldlings do not resort, where there is no place for evil, that is where my mind delights. So where the mind doesn't quake or blaze, where the mind has no fires of greed, hate, and delusion, it doesn't quake in fear, it can be interpreted a little bit as a place in the mind where you get quiet and still and safe and centered. Worldlings don't resort there, but meditators do. They take up refuge there. They rest in there. They live there. That is where my mind delights, says Upachala. So here the focus is the world's blazing out there, and I'm resting inside in a place where the mind is still and quiet. So that lends itself to the idea that that's what we're supposed to do, just kind of be Mr. Natural, Mrs. Natural. Just sit quietly and let the world do what it does. And there's a powerful story that the tradition tells, or actually it's in the first person, the Buddha tells it, of the Buddha's awakening. Right afterwards, the Buddha was awakened, and the next thing he did was he reflected like this. He had this thought. It's hard to see the truth. It's hard to see the truth of that I discovered with my awakening. It's hard to experience the stilling of the mind, the relinquishing of attachments, the destruction of craving, and nirvana. If I were to teach the Dhamma, if I was to teach the teachings, others would not understand me, and that would be wearying and troublesome for me. And then it says here, thereupon there came upon me spontaneously these verses never heard before. Enough with teaching the Dhamma, that even I found hard to reach, for it will never be perceived by those who live in lust and hate. Those died in lust, wrapped in darkness, will never discern this Dhamma, which goes against the worldly stream, subtle, deep, and difficult to see. Considering thus, my mind inclined to inaction rather than to teaching the Dhamma. So the first, according to this text, one of the first things that occurred to the Buddha after he himself experienced awakening was towards inactivity. It's too difficult to teach people. They won't learn. Might as well just be Mr. Natural and sit there and just practice. And luckily for us, or at least for the story, it's probably a little bit of a myth, this story, because they'll see what happens next. Then the great god Brahma, kind of the ruling god, the chief god of the heavens, recognized what was happening in the Buddha's mind. And he thought to himself, the world will be lost, the world will perish, since the mind of the Buddha inclines to inaction rather than to teaching the Dhamma. So then he went down to India and talked to the Buddha and asked the Buddha, please teach. And in his request, hearing that request, the Buddha then surveyed the world and decided there were indeed people with little dust in their eyes, people who could be taught, and then he started teaching, and those teachings then have come down to us now. So here we have this idea of inaction being somehow easy to get confused or easy to get pulled into as a result of the kind of the deep peace and subtleness of meditation is something that I think that is part of the territory, part of the danger of this meditation tradition itself. And we find people who then succumb to that. But what we see over and over again in the suttas, just like I'm saying that earlier, that relaxation is a basis for everything. For the Buddha, in his teachings over and over again, the basis of his teaching turns out to be action. And a particular emphasis to engage in deeds that are good, in good deeds, in ethical deeds, and avoid what's unethical. And that's foundational. And to do that in actions, in speech, in body, in speech, and in mind. And he repeats this over and over again in different ways, that we should do this. Someone who is a well-practiced monk is someone who avoids doing wrong conduct, harmful conduct in body, speech, and mind, but rather is engaged in beneficial conduct in body, speech, and mind. And I can't underscore how often the Buddha, one way or the other, will engage in conversation with people. He lays this down as the foundation for everything else that follows. When he engages in interreligious debates that he did at that time, he doesn't fall back on philosophy or some ultimate nature of consciousness or ultimate nature of the cosmos or some great metaphysical principle or even experience. He comes back always engaged in these debates, not always, but many times, emphasizing that for him, that what's important is a person not killing, not stealing, not engaging in sexual misconduct, not lying, not having involved in divisive speech, not involved in harsh speech, not involved in pointless speech. That those are important things. And he asks, does your religion have that, or do your teachers live that way? And sometimes when he's talking to other practitioners and say, well, my teacher is not quite that, and then that kind of enough for the Buddha to win the debate, because that's the foundation, being ethical. And then you build on that, then there's the development of practice. And this emphasis on action includes actions of the mind. And from the Buddha's point of view, meditation is a form of action. That meditation is the activity of the mind in a particular way. So in the last meditation, if you did it with us, then the emphasis was on relaxation. That's an activity of the mind, to relax, to relax. If you do loving kindness, that's an activity of the mind. You bring love to yourself. If you're just practicing just being mindful and open awareness to what is, that also is a kind of activity of the mind. And it might seem like a very simple activity of the mind. It might seem like the activity is just to get out of the way and let awareness just operate. But even to get out of the way to let it operate is an activity of the mind. That there's always action. Now, part of the reason people are reluctant to pick, even read the teachings of the Buddha and see how much he emphasizes action, is that action can be tiring. A lot of people have associations with action that comes with tension and striving and pushing and trying to make things different than what they are. But the action the Buddha is going towards is, in meditation, is action that allows us to be peaceful. And being peaceful is not so that we can just have our own inner peace. The Buddha talked about how when we're peaceful in our faculties and peaceful in our mind, then our actions can be peaceful. If we have ease within, then there's ease in how we act and what we do. And this kind of wonderful task of learning how to act and how to be free, how to act peacefully, how to act without stress, how to act without tension, is kind of at the heart of what the Buddha is teaching. So this action, but also it's the actions, he promoted actions that were ethical. In English we would call it ethical. And we have, here's a quote that makes this clear. The Buddha, the fully enlightened one, relying on the Dhamma, honoring, respecting, venerating the Dhamma, taking the Dhamma as a standard, banner, and authority. So the Buddha really depends on the Dhamma. So the Dhamma can be the truth. But one way to understand the Dhamma is sometimes translated into English as the law, but I think a good argument can be made that Dhamma can also mean justice. What's just? Occasionally it's translated as righteous. But I think in our modern climate, I think justice works quite well. relying on justice, honoring and respecting and venerating justice, taking the justice as a standard, banner, and authority, providing just protection, shelter, and guard in regard to verbal action, saying such verbal action should be cultivated, such verbal action should not be cultivated. So here, this great hyperbolic kind of beginning of this little teaching is a little bit more hyperbolic. How grand this kind of paragraph is, all building up to a simple statement that a parent can tell a child. You should cultivate, you should develop certain kinds of speech, and you should avoid other kinds of speech. For the Buddha, it was to cultivate speech which was beneficial, ethically beneficial, to avoid that which is harmful, unethical speech. He said the same thing, exactly the same paragraph is said around physical contact actions, what you do with your body, and also with the mind. So here we see that the Buddha decided to teach, and one of the strong things he's taught was action, that certain kinds of way of acting in the world. Here's another teaching that talking about action. And again, also this one also kind of has a little bit of a grand beginning to get our attention, perhaps. Possessing a bhikkhu, a monastic, is acting for the welfare of many people, for the happiness of many people, for the good, welfare, and happiness of many people, of devas and human beings, by encouraging them to be concordant, to be in harmony, encourages them in concordant or harmonious bodily action. The word is action. Concordant in verbal action, concordant in mental actions. Possessing these three things, a well-known monastic is acting for the welfare of many people, for the happiness of many people, for the good, the welfare, and happiness of many people, of devas and human beings. So here again, we find an explicit encouragement to not only act ethically, but also to encourage others to be ethical. And this ethical action, I think in the climate of our society in the United States today, is like relaxation, it's like foundational. It seems like this country, there are huge arguments and the divisiveness in the country. You would think that they could somehow find their way if everyone can decide to be ethical, to not cause harm. But there's an ethical challenge this country is facing in all kinds of directions and all sides. But this idea that Buddhists would act in the world is also provided with these teachings of the Buddha. And it could be for other ethical behavior, but I choose the one for speech because that's such a big one in our society. A practitioner thinks this way: if someone were to damage my welfare with false speech, that would not be pleasing and agreeable to me. Now, if I were to damage the welfare of another with false speech, that would not be pleasing and agreeable to the other either. What is displeasing and disagreeable to me is displeasing and disagreeable to the other too. How can I inflict upon another what is displeasing and disagreeable to me? Having reflected thus, the person abstains from false speech and exhorts others to abstain from false speech, and speaks in praise of abstinence from false speech. So here's the Buddha's encouraging not just being ethical oneself, but to speak up, to act speaking up for right speech and avoidance of false speech. And the rest of this teaching, to speak up for the benefits, the praising, not taking, not stealing, not taking from others what is not given, and avoiding doing so, not killing, and avoiding killing. So the action. So the Buddha's teachings is phenomenally centered on action. It's surprising how much. And so if you are despairing or afraid or angry, upset, if you find yourself complaining a lot, if you find yourself just drawn to the news and just despair and feel ground down by the ongoing onslaught of challenges this world has, the Buddhist proposal for you is that you should do something. You should act. Modern psychology says that people who do even small acts are much less likely to be depressed, to despair, be discouraged. Do something. Action is at the heart of Buddhist practice. And act in ways that are beneficial. Do what you can, even small acts. It can be small acts, make a small financial donations to people who are struggling with a fire. Maybe for the Red Cross. Maybe it's bringing a meal to someone who's sheltered in place, or someone who cannot go out shopping with the COVID-19. Go shopping for them. It could be that you simply make sure your street is a little bit cleaner, picking up the trash. It could be that you send a nice email to someone or a letter, talking about how you appreciate them. People are uplifted by being appreciated. And perhaps you talk more often about what you enjoy and what's beautiful and what's pleasant and nice that's happening. There's something very powerful for the heart and the mind, for ourselves and others, if we just talk about things that we really appreciate and enjoy. And if you feel like you're not doing that enough, maybe try it sometimes and just speak kindly, speak with appreciation. And see what that does to you. Don't sugarcoat things. Don't pretend things are better than they really are. Don't avoid the difficulties of the world. But don't get mired in those difficulties. Find some way to empower, enliven, engage your heart so that it is more uplifted or inspired, because it's the uplifted, inspired heart that will know how to live ethically. It's the uplifted, inspired, gladdened heart that is in a better place to act in the world beneficially, and to act in the world in ways which are not stressful and not under the weight of obligation and duty and responsibility and all this stuff. So we live in very challenging times. And I believe what the Buddha would say in the foundation is do something. Don't just sit. Don't complain. Don't despair. Do something. If you're upset about the elections, get involved in getting out the vote. If you're concerned about climate change, develop a little network of friends who are lobbying Sacramento or Washington, D.C., or maybe you do cleanup someplace, even in your neighborhood. Support an organization that supports the environment. There's all kinds of things you can do. And with this regard, I wanted to tell you a little bit about a wonderful thing that happened last week for me. And that is, since I was probably a freshman in college, I've had a strong interest in the environment and environmental action, ecology, and I was actually slated to go and become a soil scientist because I wanted to do soil conservation in places where there was a lot of erosion in the world before I got involved in Buddhism. And but all these years I wanted to do something related to the environment. And because I've been involved for many years with training Buddhist chaplains for hospitals and prisons and hospices, a little over a year ago, I started with Susie Harrington and Kirsten Rudstem a Buddhist eco-chaplaincy program to train people to be eco-chaplains, environmental chaplains. And we graduated the first crop last week, and a year-long, 15-month-long training. And I just, so it was a little bit my action to try to bring people into the world. And what was so inspiring was to watch these people who went through the trainings, from 22 people, mature or grow or kind of become more empowered to have projects, to do activities, to try to make a difference in this world in relationship to the non-human world, the natural world, the environmental world. And why I say this is that the experience of being with them, because they were actually doing something for the environment, these were people who didn't feel like they were crushed or despairing or angry so much about what was going on. They felt empowered. They were actually doing something. And I know other people of other people who don't know what to do and not finding themselves. Who some of them are longtime Buddhist practitioners, who because they don't have an avenue to act or feel they should act or can act around this, they're feeling despairing what's happening now. Some of the inspired Buddhists that I know are these days who are not discouraged, or despairing or crushed by it all, are the ones who are actively involved with getting out the vote. And yesterday I talked to Jack Cornfield, and he's completely inspired these days and working hard to get out the vote movements and encouraging other people to do it. And it's quite something. So the point being that there is action, and the primary Dharma point I wanted to make today is at the foundation of the Buddha's teachings is the importance of action. And if you remember that I think will probably give you lots to think about and reflect on and wonder what's going on here and how does that work? And how does that work with meditation practice? And then someone asks about this eco-chaplaincy. We're starting a whole new training for it in January. And you find information about it at the Sati Center for Buddhist Studies. And so, thank you very much, and may your actions be beneficial for yourself and for the world.